Oh man, damn it. I had one cooking, but I fucked up, leaking my key all over the place by doing it. Because I forgot that I still had that shit record, so let me end this. So this video from the infographic show, shout out to you. You've done a great job keeping us informed, and also, I have the vibe of this whole channel is kind of we're fighting injustice, and I applaud that too. So he talks about how Amazon Luna just proved the buy button that may not mean ownership. Games people paid full price for are disappearing, cloud saves are being deleted, and Amazon is arguing in court that digital purchases were always just temporary licenses and everything. And since they're arguing that, I just grabbed my auth code and begun converting all my .aax files from Audible to .flac to back up my library locally, so that when the publishers start demanding more money to license the content to Amazon isn't capable of taking it away from me. Now, let me explain. One of the things that happens here is that, like, Amazon may not even explain this in open court to their people, and they may not even admit it to their users, but, how this happens most often, in essence, is that behind the scenes at these damn corporations, there will be what are known in the industry as business to business contracts that are signed, right? So there will be a publisher that will own the licensing, like Tor Publishing, like I believe is one of the big ones, or was back in the day. I don't know, and they'll own all of these. There'll be a publisher of these books, right? And they'll own all these copyrights and what will happen is that authors will basically submit their their book to the publisher, right? And the publisher will look at a lot of the submissions and only publish what they consider to be any good or in sync with what the market would actually. Well, in reality, it's what will be in demand that happens there. So they have a gauge on their readers and what they're interested in and such, and they'll they buy the sales and everything else, and people talk and they monitor some of that chatter too, and and so they observe a lot of that stuff, and so they've got some general idea of what people are wanting to read and everything, and of course they look at Goodreads and what people are saying on there and everything, and all that stuff's going on, and all this data is being created, and people are getting more and more information about what people want to read and everything. And as a result of all of it, because we're all reporting on it ourselves, we're giving all this information away for free to the platforms like Goodreads, so everybody can see what it is that we think about the books that we're reading and everything. And so this is happening, and all this data is being created, and they're getting a better and better grip on their customers and what it is they're actually interested in. And so they're making their materials on that basis and everything. And so the publisher will have all the stuff and information available to them, and they'll accept the manuscripts that come in that are, basically, are the drafts that come in from their people that are in sync with what their readers want, and basically, and are, sufficiently interesting enough quality, that they think the market will adapt and buy it and be interested in what it is those books have in them, and they're very good at what they do and everything because they've had to be, especially in these challenging times where readership is on the decline and everything. And so they'll license, the content, so they'll go and there'll be this meeting that happens between Amazon. Maybe it takes place over the phone. Maybe it's video conferencing that takes place between the two of them because maybe they can't be in the same place. But in this meeting, they'll basically agree to sign up the license over to them. But just like for the rest of us, where they've got 90 days to revoke the content, those contracts will be like, we'll license the content to your platform for, you know, 5 years. Basically, I don't know how long those contracts necessarily last, but that's just I'm pulling that one out of my ass. But it's just to explain this stuff and everything and that element of it. Just say 5 years, okay, for the sake of the argument and everything, and they'll basically be like, we'll give you 5 years of access to our content, but after that, we're gonna we may renew. You have the right to renew the contract, but just keep in mind that depending on how things go in the economy, the prices may be different at that point up the stage. We're just gonna have to see how things go and everything. And so 5 years go by and prices have skyrocketed we're living in a deeply inflationary world, and they come back and say we're gonna have to ask a lot more for the to license that contract to you again. Here's the new terms. Here's the new price that we're trying to charge, and Amazon will balk at the price and say fuck that, and bail on the contract, and then pretty soon they're back before you, and they're basically telling their users, with the we're revoking this content within this period of time and everything, and you've got 90 days. And by the way, our contracts had buried in them these clauses at the very bottom and everything, or buried in the fine print that basically said, that we could do this, and that buying didn't mean true ownership and everything. We've been transparent about it. It's right there in the legalese, if you're, and everything. And if you actually read the fucking contract, you would know that and everything. And you would know that these have never been intended as actual ownership that happens and everything. And so it gets dumped on you and everything because they're not willing to pay the publisher the same amount of money that the publisher wants anymore. The relationship has soured behind the scenes between the two companies, at least somewhat, because the Amazon or whatever, Netflix is or whatever it is, these companies that do this, that the licenses have expired and they're not willing to pay the new price, and so you lose a big chunk of your library that was licensed to one company. Or maybe one company, like within the case of Netflix, decides that we want our own platform, we don't want to license the shit to Netflix anymore, and suddenly Netflix loses access to that person's contract once at content once the license expires, and then they make you pay for it by removing the content and everything, and then they go on their own platform, and then you have to pay another person $9.99 a month, to access the content in their library on top of Netflix and everything. And everybody wants their own cut. They get greedy, and all this shit spirals, and this gets dumped on you, as the end consumer, who gets shafted as the customer, and you lose access to a good chunk of your library. As a consequence, Amazon is not willing to pay somebody here, and that's why in all likelihood, they're just not willing to pay, somebody that jacked up the prices on the licensing that happened between, the licensing that took place between, like, Amazon and, everything, and behind the scenes, and pretty soon you've lost access to a huge amount of your content and everything as a result of all of it and everything. And I don't really fully trust the cloud for those reasons. So I just grabbed my auth code and began converting all my .aex files from Audible to Flax to back up my library locally, so when the publishers start demanding more money to license the content to Amazon, Amazon is not in the position to take the content away from me, because now I've got localized backups and they can't do fuck all about that. And by the way, I have been recording with a trusty VPN. That way, if somebody takes this video as a confession or calls the cops on me or nags to, Audible about me violating the terms of service, well, tough diddly fucking shit, because look at that. I'm not in Denver, and I'm not in fucking Seattle, I can tell you that much. And everything. And if you go to OVPN and you subpoena the information that they had about who was connected, and everything, and you pull it out, and you're armed with a warrant from a court and a judge has signed off on it, they will hand you over what they have on file, and none of it will be my IP address or MAC address. So they won't have anything that they can take to my ISP and ask, my ISP to reveal which subscriber was behind this and everything. Meaning I'm a ghost to them. I don't exist, except that I do. They just don't know where I am, and they can't do shit about it. My threat model has included courts and the law for a long time now, so I have systems that are engineered to make the law relevant. Whew.